In the face of all this discouraging news, some news anchors look to journalists from the past for signs of hope. What have they seen in recent events? Bill Moyers is called upon in this regard by many current journalists.
Put into context what we're seeing today. What went through your mind first as we see George Floyd's final farewell and being laid to rest?
The first image I had, and I'm very glad to be with you, Christiane, the first image I had was of a conversation I did many years ago with one of the wisest men of our times, the legendary mythologist Joseph Campbell, who said to me, if you want to change the world, change the metaphor. And I think the funeral that we saw today is perhaps the beginning of changing the metaphor that we use to address civil rights from the valley of despair, let's say, because very little has changed over the last 25 years, despite all the civil rights legislation. That is, very little has changed in the daily lives of most African Americans, to perhaps a metaphor of, the beginning of change with the Sam Cooke song that they sang at the funeral a few minutes ago. A change is going to come. And when I look at these young people, particularly, and many of them are millennials, as I have three millennial grandchildren, many of them are millennials who've been rather lethargic in the past few years about the power of politics to change anything. And I see them now looking beyond this moment to the country that we're going to become in their adult majority if we don't change. So I hear the sounds of change. I've heard them many times in the last 50 years, but something about this is bracing.
Well, Bill Moyers seems to see some optimism ahead in the youth.
I believe that it's up to us, the youngest generation, to stand up and ignite a movement that will change the mindset of every person on this planet. In fact, I believe it's what we were born to do. And the reality is, we don't really have a choice. The earth is calling us. Future generations are screaming at us.
We're fighting against these dirty politicians, these corporations that want to desecrate our sacred land. But I'm saying no. And many people, millions of people in this world are saying no.
When I was 9, I got together with 13 of my friends or so, and we got pesticides out of our parks. We called ourselves the Earth Guardians. And now there are hundreds of thousands of young people all over the world that are rising up as Earth Guardians in communities all over the place. One dope thing that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to sue this government. Myself and 20 other youth plaintiffs are filing a lawsuit to hold our federal government accountable for violating our constitutional inalienable right to life, liberty, and property because of their inaction on climate change.
I got involved with climate activism when I was 12 years old. I joined a campaign to stop a development proposal in my home state of Maine. When I got to high school, I wanted to continue doing this work and I wanted all of my friends to be involved, but there was no environmental club. So I started one and we called it the Climate Action Club. We raised enough money to install solar panels on our school. We had the largest reusable bag campaign in Maine. We also galvanized this really big movement in our community. Then I went to Harvard and I co-founded Divest Harvard. At our first meeting, we had 10 people in a room and none of us knew what we were doing. Now, in our third year, we have 70,000 people that have signed on to our campaign.
I'm very proud of the youth that are standing up. I'm very proud to see the essence in the children because that's beautiful and we cannot take that away.
Yes, the youth movement has been strong, especially on the climate front, and they're making alliances now across the country and across the world on the questions of racism and inclusion. They've in fact started to teach themselves through self-guided learning and teaching during these times of global lockdown and isolation. Under conditions of enforced isolation and lockdown, the youth have found ways to assert solidarity and share the joy of art, even in the face of their own fears, anxiety, and anger. Despite conditions of enforced isolation and lockdown, these youth have found a way to express joy and affirm solidarity with all others who are struggling now for justice, equity, and inclusion.
But it's what is in your heart, that fire lit within inside you. And that fire is rising in the youth, and you could feel it. You could feel it in the ground. You can hear it in the trees. You could feel it in the air.
It's a revolution that'll ignite the compassion in every person's heart so that they consider our future with every decision they make. So the time has now come for us to take matters into our own hands. So now let me ask you, Who is ready to stand up, unite together across generations, and start a revolution that is so loud, so provocative, and so unquestioning that we will be impossible to ignore? Let's make it happen.
Before all the world, the youth challenged the fatal myopia, greed, and childishness of the Trump generation. It did this long ago. Before Trump assumed the presidency, he was elected in November 2016, but didn't assume office until January 2017. And over a month before he came into office, the youth of the world responded and rejected this form of leadership. Can grown-ups catch on? Can they catch up with the youth? What have we learned from this global virus about moral authority in times of crisis? We've learned that it must respond beyond hatred and militarized power to a just, equitable, inclusive, and youth-inspired world.